I thought I knew everything about my family. I knew the routines, the habits, the unspoken rules we all lived by. I believed that whatever flaws we had were normal, nothing out of the ordinary. Just the usual cracks that form in any home over time. But I was wrong. One discovery changed everything. One moment unraveled years of certainty, shattered every truth I thought I stood on. And once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. Once I knew, I couldn't pretend I didn't. I wish I had never found out. I wish I had ignored the signs. Because what I uncovered wasn't just about my son, it was about my entire life. And nothing has been the same since. This is the story of how I uncovered my son's secret, and how it exposed my entire life as a lie. Before we begin, I need to warn you. This story deals with the struggles of family, trust, and betrayal. It explores the pain of discovering things you were never meant to know. If these themes make you uncomfortable, this may not be the story for you. Let's go back to the beginning. People talk about motherhood like it's this all-consuming, instinctive thing. Like the moment you hold your child for the first time, something clicks into place, and suddenly, you just know how to love them, how to protect them, how to understand them. But no one talks about what happens when that connection starts to fade. When your child becomes a stranger. When you wake up one day and realize the person you raised, the person who once ran to you for comfort, is someone you barely know anymore. That's where I was with Braylon. When he was little, I could read him like a book. I knew what made him laugh, what made him cry, what scared him, what made him feel safe. I was his world, and he was mine. But as he grew older, that closeness began to slip away. At first, I told myself it was normal. All kids go through phases. They stop talking as much. They keep more secrets. They start building lives outside of their parents. It hurt, of course, but I convinced myself that this was just how things were supposed to be. And maybe that would have been enough for me to accept, if everything else in my life wasn't already crumbling around me. Zechariah and I had been married for 22 years. When we first met, I thought I had found the kind of love that could survive anything. He was charming, dependable, the kind of man who never let his emotions get the best of him. I loved that about him back then. He was my anchor, the steady presence in my life when everything else felt uncertain. But somewhere along the way, that steadiness turned into distance. We stopped talking the way we used to. The easy conversations we once had became forced, like we were reciting lines from a script we had long forgotten the meaning of. We still played our roles, husband and wife, mother and father, but there was no warmth in it anymore. Just obligation. Routine. And when intimacy faded, I barely noticed. It wasn't like we had some big fight about it. It just happened. Or rather, it stopped happening. At first, I thought it was just a rough patch. He was always busy with work, always exhausted when he came home. And I was tired, too. Raising Braylon, managing the house, trying to keep up with the million little things that came with being a wife and mother, it drained me. So, I let it slide. One night turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. And before I even realized it, years had gone by, and I couldn't remember the last time he had touched me in a way that felt real. The last time he had looked at me like I was something more than just the woman he shared a house with. But we never talked about it. We never fought about it, either. That was the thing about Zechariah, he wasn't the kind of man who argued. If something was wrong, he simply withdrew, buried himself in work, shut down. And I learned to do the same. It was easier that way. Easier than facing the truth that maybe we had already lost each other and were just too afraid to admit it. So, I threw myself into being a mother. I convinced myself that if nothing else, at least I still had Braylon. But even that was slipping away from me. He was 20 now. Smart. Independent. Always polite, always responsible. The kind of son most mothers would be proud of. But he was distant, too. Not in an outright rebellious way, he never gave me any real trouble, never did anything that made me worry. But that was part of the problem. He was just there. Existing in the same house as me, but never really present. He went to class, came home, locked himself in his room, and barely spoke to me unless he had to. It was like living with a ghost of the boy he used to be. I told myself it was just a phase. That he was busy with school, with life, with the things that 20-year-olds are supposed to care about. He had a girlfriend, Savannah, and she was wonderful. Sweet, kind, the kind of girl any mother would be happy to see their son with. She was always warm when she spoke to me, always made an effort to include me in conversations when she was over. Sometimes, I wondered if she saw what I saw, that Braylon was slipping away from me, from everyone. But if she did, she never said anything about it. And I never asked. I didn't ask a lot of things back then. Maybe I should have. Maybe I should have pushed harder, forced him to talk to me, to let me in. Maybe if I had, I would have seen it sooner. I would have seen what was right in front of me the whole time. But I didn't. I told myself that he was fine, that everything was fine. That our family was still intact. And I clung to that illusion for as long as I could. Until the day it all came crashing down. If you're still with me, don't forget to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more stories like this. Trust me, there's so much more to uncover. There's something about routine that makes you blind. When you do the same things every day, walk the same halls, touch the same objects, live inside the same spaces, you stop noticing things. The little details blend into the background, like white noise. And maybe that's why I missed it for so long. Maybe that's why, for years, I overlooked the things that should have made me stop and question everything. But the truth has a way of creeping in. Slowly at first. A feeling. A moment. A small, nagging thought that refuses to leave. And before you know it, those little things start adding up, and suddenly, you can't ignore them anymore. It started on an afternoon like any other. Zechariah was at work, Braylon was out, and the house was quiet, just the way I liked it when I was cleaning. I had fallen into a rhythm, moving through the rooms, picking up stray clothes, wiping down surfaces, folding blankets, things I had done 100 times before. And then I stepped into Braylon's room. I never went in there much. Not because I wasn't allowed, he had never told me not to, but because there was something about it that always made me feel like I was intruding. His space had a stillness to it, an absence of warmth that made it feel more like a waiting room than a bedroom. The walls were bare, the bed always made, the desk tidy. It was the kind of room that should have made me proud. My son was clean, organized, responsible. But instead, it unsettled me. It felt impersonal. Like a place someone lived in but never really existed in. I was halfway through dusting when I noticed the tissues. At first, it didn't seem strange. A box of tissues on the nightstand. Normal. But then I spotted another empty box near the trash can. And another. And another. 4. No, 5. All empty. Stuffed into a plastic bag that hadn't been tied up yet, as if he had meant to throw them away but hadn't gotten around to it. A weird feeling settled in my stomach. It wasn't just the tissues. It was the sheer amount of them. This wasn't from a cold or allergies. And then I saw the drawer. The one that had always been unlocked before. The one where he kept his school supplies, spare change, random little things that never seemed to have a proper place. Except now, it was locked. It wasn't just closed, it was sealed tight with a small padlock I had never seen before. Something about that lock made my skin prickle. I had never been the kind of mother who snooped through her son's things. I respected his privacy. But in that moment, standing there in the too-clean room with its strange emptiness, I felt an urge to open that drawer. I didn't. Instead, I finished cleaning and left, telling myself I was being ridiculous. That there was nothing strange about a locked drawer, that he was an adult and had a right to keep his things private. And I might have let it go if it weren't for what happened next. It was a few days later, at Layla's house, when the topic first came up. We had been friends for years, and our conversations usually jumped from one thing to another: work, family, gossip, whatever came to mind. That afternoon, we were sitting in her kitchen, drinking tea, when she started talking about something she had read online. A medical article, she said. Something about hyperspermia. I barely listened at first. It was one of those words that sounded vaguely familiar but not important enough to hold my attention. But then she kept talking, explaining what it was, the symptoms, the way it affected people. Excessive sperm production. Higher than normal ejaculation volume. And then she laughed, shaking her head as she stirred her tea. Can you imagine, she had said. Some poor guy out there dealing with that? I mean, I guess there are worse problems to have. I forced a chuckle, but something about it stuck in my head. I didn't know why at the time, but it made me uneasy. Like an itch I couldn't scratch. I kept thinking about Braylon's room, the tissues, the locked drawer. And for the first time, a thought crept into my mind that I didn't want there. A thought that told me I needed to pay attention. The next time I found something strange, it wasn't in Braylon's room. It was in the laundry. I had been sorting clothes as usual, separating colors, folding what was already clean, making sure nothing delicate got mixed in. Savannah had been staying over more often, which wasn't unusual. She was practically part of the family by now, and I had gotten used to finding her things mixed in with ours, her sweaters, her socks, the occasional misplaced hair tie. But that day, as I was pulling clothes from the hamper, something stopped me. A pair of Savannah's underwear, damp, with a thick, dried stain spreading across the fabric. The kind of stain that couldn't be mistaken for anything else. I froze, my hands tightening around the cloth. I had done Braylon's laundry for years. I had washed his clothes, folded them, put them away. And yet, in that moment, staring at that stain, I felt like I was seeing something I wasn't supposed to. Like I had accidentally walked in on something private, something that should have remained unseen. My mind jumped back to the tissues. The locked drawer. The conversation with Layla. The pieces were starting to form a picture, but I didn't want to look at it. I threw the underwear into the wash and forced myself to forget about it. To stop thinking about things that weren't my business. But it was already too late. Once suspicion takes root, it doesn't let go. It sits there, quiet but persistent, waiting for confirmation. And confirmation was coming. I just didn't know it yet. I started noticing other things after that. The way Braylon avoided me whenever I asked about his life. The way he disappeared for hours without explanation. The way his door was always closed, the lock clicking shut the moment he stepped inside. The way Savannah looked at him sometimes, like there was something she wanted to say but couldn't. I wanted to ignore it. I wanted to pretend that everything was fine. But the more I tried, the harder it became. Something was wrong. I didn't know what, not yet, but I could feel it. And I knew, sooner or later, I was going to find out. I tried to let it go. I really did. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was seeing things that weren't there, that my mind was twisting little details into something bigger than they were. But no matter how much I tried to push it away, it kept creeping back in. The tissues. The locked drawer. The stain on Savannah's clothes. The way Braylon avoided me. The weight of it all sat in my chest like a stone, and the more I ignored it, the heavier it became. So, I did what any mother would do when she's worried about her child. I looked for answers. It started small. Subtle. I wasn't proud of it, but I went through his room again. Not in an obvious way, just a quick glance while I was tidying up. The locked drawer was still there, untouched, sealed tight with that little padlock. His trash can was always emptied now, as if he had become aware of how much he was throwing away. His laundry, when I picked it up, was always done by him first, as if he didn't want me handling it anymore. Everything about him had become controlled, like he was carefully managing every little detail of what I could and couldn't see. And that made me even more suspicious. Then, one evening, when I knew he was out, I went to the family computer. Braylon had his own laptop, of course, but sometimes he used the shared one in the living room for schoolwork. I wasn't expecting to find much, but I checked the search history anyway. At first, it was normal: college websites, YouTube, a few random searches about assignments. But then I scrolled further, and my breath caught in my throat. Medical forums. Pages upon pages of them. All about hyperspermia. I clicked on one, my heart pounding. The posts were from men who had the condition, discussing their symptoms, their struggles, the impact it had on their relationships. Some were scientific, talking about the biological side of it. Others were more personal, describing the way it had shaped their sex lives, their self-esteem, their ability to have normal relationships. Some posts were from partners, asking for advice on how to deal with it. And as I kept scrolling, I realized something. Braylon wasn't just researching. He was posting. He had an account. An anonymous username, but his writing was unmistakable. He had been asking questions, talking to strangers, describing his experiences. My stomach twisted as I read his words, the way he spoke about feeling different, about struggling to manage it, about how it was affecting his personal life. About how someone had helped him handle it. Someone close. I felt sick. I sat there, staring at the screen, my hands gripping the mouse so tightly my knuckles turned white. What did he mean by that? Who was he talking about? I closed the laptop and sat in silence, trying to breathe, trying to think. I wanted to believe this was normal, that it was just a phase, that I was reading too much into it. But deep down, I knew better. Something was wrong. I just didn't know how wrong. That night, I told Zechariah. We were sitting in bed, the room dimly lit, the sounds of the city humming faintly through the window. I turned to him and told him everything, about the tissues, the locked drawer, the laundry, the search history, the forum posts. I expected him to be shocked, to sit up and take it seriously. But instead, he just sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. Amaya, you're overthinking this. I blinked at him. Overthinking? How could he say that? How could he not see it? He's a young man, Zechariah continued. Do you remember what it was like being that age? He's just going through a phase. Maybe he's embarrassed. Maybe he's dealing with things he doesn't want to talk about. That doesn't mean something's wrong. His voice was calm, reasonable, dismissive. The way it always was. He had a way of making me feel like I was crazy, like my feelings were just overreactions. And for a moment, I almost believed him. Almost. But then I saw the way he wouldn't meet my eyes, the way his fingers drummed against the blanket like he was restless, uncomfortable. And something inside me whispered that he knew more than he was letting on. I didn't press him. There was no point. He had already decided this wasn't a problem. So I turned away and stared at the ceiling, knowing I was on my own. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place a week later. It was late. Zechariah was asleep, Braylon was in his room, and I was in the kitchen, absent-mindedly scrolling through emails on the shared laptop. I wasn't looking for anything. I had given up searching. But then, a message popped up in the corner of the screen. A notification from an app one didn't recognize. Savannah, I can still taste you. I swear it's more every time. How do you even have this much? I froze. My heart stopped. For a second, I thought I had read it wrong. But no, it was there, clear as day, sitting on the screen like a slap to the face. Savannah. Talking to Braylon. Saying things no girlfriend should ever have to say. My hand shook as I stared at the message, my mind racing. I knew I shouldn't, but I clicked. The chat opened. And what I saw made my blood run cold. Messages. Dozens of them. Late at night, in the middle of the day, whenever they thought no one would see. Explicit. Detailed. Talking about things they had done, things they wanted to do. Things that weren't just about normal relationships. Things that made my stomach churn. I couldn't breathe. My own son. Savannah. This wasn't normal. This wasn't okay. Something was very, very wrong. I wanted to confront him right then and there, to storm into his room and demand answers. But I didn't. I needed to be sure. I needed proof. I needed to know exactly what I was dealing with. So, I called Melanie. She was the only person I trusted. I told her everything, every last detail, my voice shaking with the weight of it. When I finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then, finally, she spoke. Amaya, maybe you don't want to know. I clenched my fists. What are you talking about? Maybe it's best to leave it alone. I felt anger rise in my chest. How could she say that? How could she act like this wasn't important? Melanie, there's something happening with my son. I know. But what if you find something you can't come back from? I didn't answer. Because deep down, I already knew she was right. But it was too late. I had already started pulling at the thread, and I couldn't stop now. The next morning, I logged into Braylon's accounts. I didn't have to hack anything, his passwords were saved on the shared laptop. And what I found shattered everything. Braylon had been involved with someone else. And it wasn't Savannah. It was someone close. Someone too close. And in that moment, I knew, my family would never be the same again. There are moments in life that split everything into a before and an after. Moments that cannot be undone, no matter how much you wish you could rewind time and make a different choice. I had spent weeks, maybe months, trying to ignore the truth. But now, the truth was staring me in the face, refusing to be ignored any longer. I should have prepared myself for what came next. But how do you prepare for something that rips your life apart? The confrontation happened the next evening. Braylon had just come home, his keys jingling as he tossed them on the kitchen counter like any other night. He was relaxed, distracted, completely unaware that his entire world was about to shift. I stood by the dining table, my hands pressed against the wood, my nails digging into the surface. My heart pounded in my chest, but I forced myself to stay calm. I had to do this right. He barely glanced at me as he walked toward the fridge. Braylon, I said, my voice steady but sharp. He froze for a second. I saw it in the way his shoulders tensed before he turned to face me. Yeah? I held up my phone. The screen was still open to his messages. The ones with Savannah. The ones I had read over and over again until I knew every word by heart. What is this? I asked. His face didn't change at first. He played it well, I'll give him that. His expression stayed neutral, unreadable, the way it always did when he was hiding something. But I saw the flicker of recognition in his eyes. He knew exactly what I was talking about. What do you mean? He said. I clicked the screen, scrolling down, making sure he saw every single message. The words, the details, the confessions that left no room for doubt. I watched his face closely, waiting for his reaction. And then, finally, it cracked. He swallowed hard. His eyes darted away. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. It's not, he started, but stopped himself. Don't lie to me, I said, my voice shaking now. Don't you dare lie to me, Braylon. For a moment, he said nothing. The silence stretched between us, heavy, suffocating. And then, finally, he let out a slow breath and muttered, I didn't mean for you to find out like this. I felt my stomach drop. That was it. That was all the confirmation I needed. He wasn't going to deny it anymore. Something inside me snapped. Do you have any idea what you've done? I asked, my voice rising. Do you even understand what this means? He lifted his head then, and for the first time I saw something else in his eyes. Not guilt. Not shame. Defiance. It's not like that, he said. Then explain it to me. I shouted. Explain what I'm looking at. Explain why Savannah is sending you these messages. Explain why you've been sneaking around. You wouldn't understand, he muttered. Try me. But he just shook his head, jaw tight, refusing to say anything more. The rage inside me burned so hot I thought I might explode. But before I could say anything else, another voice cut through the air. What's going on? Zechariah. I turned to see him standing in the doorway, arms crossed, his face unreadable. He had been home for a while now, but he hadn't said anything until now. I expected him to be confused, shocked, demanding answers. But he wasn't. He was too calm. Too composed. And that was the first moment I realized something was off. You tell me, I said, my voice like ice. Do you know what your son has been doing? His eyes flickered to the phone in my hand, then to Braylon, who was still standing there, stiff and silent. And then, to my horror, Zechariah let out a slow sigh, like this was a conversation he had already had in his head 100 times before. Amaya, maybe we should talk about this privately, he said. My breath caught in my throat. Privately? I repeated. What is there to talk about privately? Did you know? He didn't answer right away. And that silence, God, that silence, was worse than any words he could have spoken. I stepped back, shaking my head, barely able to comprehend what was happening. Tell me you didn't know, I begged. Tell me you aren't part of this. His lips pressed together. It's complicated. That was all I needed to hear. A choked sound escaped my throat, something between a sob and a bitter laugh. I felt like the ground beneath me was collapsing, like the walls of our home were crumbling all at once. First Braylon. Now Zechariah. My own husband. My own son. The people I had trusted most. And then, as if this night couldn't get any worse, the front door opened. Savannah stepped inside. She stopped mid-step when she saw the tension in the room. Her eyes darted between all of us, me, Braylon, Zechariah. Her face paled. What's going on? She asked hesitantly. That's what I'd like to know, I snapped. I turned to Braylon. Tell her. Go on, tell her what I found. Braylon's expression darkened, his jaw clenching. Mom, tell her. Before he could respond, Savannah took a step forward. Amaya, listen, don't. I held up a hand. Do not try to explain this to me. But she didn't stop. You don't understand, she said, her voice urgent now. It's not what you think. Then what is it? I demanded. Because all I see is a betrayal. And then, just when I thought I couldn't take any more, Zechariah spoke. I need to tell you something, he said, his voice eerily calm. Something I should have told you a long time ago. I turned to him, my blood cold in my veins. What? He exhaled. I've been unfaithful, too. The room spun. I swayed on my feet. What? It wasn't like that, he said quickly. It wasn't an affair. It was something else. I wanted to scream. To rip the walls down. To break everything around me. My family, my home, the life I had built, it was all falling apart. I had started this night thinking my biggest problem was my son's secret. But now, standing there, staring at my husband, my liar of a husband, I realized that this was so much bigger than that. This wasn't just about Braylon. This wasn't just about hyperspermia. This was about years of secrets. Years of betrayal. Years of lies I had been blind to. And now, there was no going back. There are moments in life where time feels like it stops. Where the world keeps moving, people keep breathing, clocks keep ticking, but for you, everything is still. Frozen in the exact moment your life shattered. That's how it felt after that night. The night I lost my family. The morning after the confrontation, the house felt different. Colder. Quieter. As if something heavy had been ripped out of it, leaving behind only the echo of what used to be. Braylon was the first to disappear. He left before I even woke up. His room was empty. His car was gone. No note, no explanation, no goodbye. Just absence. And maybe that was the worst part. The fact that after everything, he didn't even try to explain himself. Didn't try to face me. Just vanished, like a shadow slipping out before sunrise. I wanted to tell myself he'd come back. That he just needed time. But deep down, I knew better. I had seen the look in his eyes the night before. The shame, the anger, the guilt. He was drowning in it. And instead of reaching for help, he had chosen to disappear. Savannah followed soon after. She didn't call. Didn't text. She was just gone. And honestly, I didn't blame her. Whatever she had been wrapped up in, whatever choices she had made, she was still young. And she had the option to run. To leave this mess behind and pretend it had never happened. I envied her for that. Zechariah, though, he stayed. And that was almost worse. At first, he tried to talk to me. He sat me down in the kitchen, his hands folded in front of him, his voice calm, steady. The same voice he always used when he was trying to keep a situation under control. But this wasn't something he could control. Not anymore. Amaya, he said, we need to talk about this. I stared at him from across the table, numb. Talk about what? He sighed. Everything. I know I should have told you. I know I should have, why didn't you? He hesitated. And in that hesitation I knew he had no real answer. Because the truth was, he had never planned to tell me. He had been content letting me live in ignorance, in blind trust, because it was easier that way. For him. For everyone. I shook my head, pushing back from the table. I don't want to hear it. Amaya, please. But I walked away. Because there was nothing left to say. The days passed in a blur. I moved through them like a ghost, half present, half lost in the weight of it all. The house felt too big. Too empty. I kept expecting to hear Braylon's door creak open, to hear Savannah's laugh echo from the hallway, to hear Zechariah's deep voice humming from the living room. But there was only silence. I stopped cooking. Stopped sleeping. Stopped trying to pretend things were normal. Because nothing was normal anymore. One night, I found myself standing in Braylon's room, staring at the locked drawer. The padlock was still there, untouched. I had the key now, I had found it in his nightstand after he left. And yet, I couldn't bring myself to open it. I wasn't sure I wanted to know what was inside. Some things were better left unknown. But then again, wasn't that how I had ended up here in the first place? Ignoring the truth. Pretending not to see what was right in front of me. So, I unlocked it. The drawer slid open, revealing its contents. Not much. Just a small collection of things that, on their own, might have seemed meaningless. A worn-out notebook filled with scribbled thoughts and confessions. A stack of letters, never sent. A photo, one that made my stomach drop. It was a picture of all of us. Me, Zechariah, Braylon. Taken years ago, back when we still looked happy. Back when I still believed we were a normal family. But the edges were frayed, the colors faded, as if the weight of time itself had been trying to erase it. I picked up the notebook, flipping through the pages. The words inside were messy, rushed, desperate. Some were scribbled out, as if he had tried to erase them, but they were still there, lingering beneath the ink. I read them. And with every word, my heart broke a little more. I wish I could be normal. I didn't mean for this to happen. I don't know who I am anymore. I don't know how to stop. I closed the notebook and sat there, staring at the walls, my hands trembling. I had spent so much time being angry. At him. At Zechariah. At Savannah. At myself. But now, all I felt was exhaustion. A deep, aching tiredness that settled in my bones like it had always been there, waiting to be noticed. Zechariah tried to fix things. Of course, he did. He started coming home earlier. Started trying to talk to me more, to reach out in ways he never had before. But it was too late. Whatever love we had left, whatever bond had kept us together all these years, was gone now. Shattered. And I didn't have the strength to try to piece it back together. One night, as he stood in the doorway of our bedroom, he asked me something I wasn't ready to answer. Can we fix this? I didn't look at him when I responded. I don't know. And that was the truth. I didn't know. I didn't know if I could ever forgive him. If I could ever forgive Braylon. If I could ever forgive myself for not seeing it sooner. Maybe I never would. The final moment came days later. I was alone in the living room, the house dark, quiet, empty. My fingers traced the edges of an old photo frame sitting on the coffee table. The same picture I had found in Braylon's drawer. A frozen moment from a time when we were whole. Or at least, when I thought we were. I stared at it for a long time, my mind running in circles. Thinking about the past. About the future. About all the things I had ignored. About all the things I wished I had never learned. And then, for the first time in weeks, I spoke aloud, to no one but myself. Would I have been happier if I had never found out? The silence answered for me. Maybe. Maybe not. But it didn't matter anymore. Because now, there was no unknowing. Some truths set you free. Others destroy you. And sometimes, the difference between the two isn't as clear as you think. I used to believe that honesty was the foundation of everything. That love, trust, and family were built on it. That no matter how painful, knowing the truth was always better than living in the dark. But now, I'm not so sure. Because the truth didn't save me. It didn't make me stronger. It didn't heal my family, it tore it apart. Braylon is gone. Savannah is gone. Zechariah. I don't know if we will ever be whole again. And me? I'm left here, holding the pieces of a life I no longer recognize. So, I ask you, if you were in my shoes, would you have wanted to know? Would you have followed the clues, connected the dots, uncovered the truth, if you knew it would cost you everything? Or would you have closed your eyes and lived in the illusion a little longer? People say infidelity is about betrayal. About breaking promises. About lies. But sometimes, the worst betrayals aren't the ones that happen in secret. They're the ones we commit against ourselves. The lies we tell to keep things together. The warnings we ignore because facing them means everything will change. Maybe the real question isn't how could this happen? Maybe it's, did I always know? Would you want to know the truth, no matter the cost? If this story made you think, if it made you feel something, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more.